Should you trust this cheap waterproof case with your expensive camera? Today I'm going to be reviewing and going through my experience with the DiCAPac WP-S10. Okay, so let's go through how the DiCAPac actually works and how you're meant to assemble it. So here's the DiCAPac itself, here's the lens barrel. There's two holes here, the little socks that you're meant to use for manual focus or to turn autofocus on and off. Here's the front port, and this unscrews, and inside here you have a rubber seal. That's all the protection you get from the front. So there is a bit of anti-glare coating, but not much, as you can see, because it's glaring quite a lot under the studio lights here. So how they want you to get your camera in here is to take off the lens, put the body in, and then put the lens through this hole. There's not a lot of handwork movement here, so I would not recommend doing this method. Instead, I would put the front port on and then put the whole assembly down in one go. I'll show you what I mean now. Let's grab the 5D2. Now with the 5D2 and the 51.8, the 51.8 will not fit in there by itself because it's too short compared to the lens barrel. The lens barrel will just simply sag over the top of it and cover the entire image. So I have this lens hood just so that I can extend the length of the lens and get it to fit in and not have the lens barrel drooping over the lens. Okay, so this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to open up the entire thing here and try and get this. Is really hard to do on camera, to be honest, but there we are. I'm getting it down, and as you can see there, that's the lens there about to poke through the hole. That's what it looks like on the inside if the camera would focus. Okay, we're getting it in there now. It's almost aligned, and I often put tissues at the bottom here to get a perfect alignment. As you can see, that's how I do it. So the lens is now through, and there's the lens cap there. And the barrel isn't sagging because the lens hood is holding it up just enough. The lens hood comes to about there. Without that, it would be sagging over because these ribs do not support much weight, so it doesn't actually support itself even. Now, to actually tighten it up, what you have to do is you have to lay it flush down like this, and here is like a Ziploc bag. So you have to do these tight. I'm not going to do it properly, but you'd pinch these all the way down. And then you have to be very, very precise with your rolling. You have to do a very, very tight roll. So if I sort of give you an example here, you have to do a very, very, very tight roll, keeping it very, very tight like this. Otherwise it won't fit. Keep pushing it down, and there's a Velcro one there, and that matches up with this Velcro. You cover that over, and then you cover that once again. And that is it. That is the DiCAPac sealed and ready for the water. That's how you would get your camera in. If you have a longer lens, it is more fiddly, and maybe you would have to unscrew this front lens port and do that method, but I really hate doing that, so I'd advise doing this method instead. Generally, the 35 Sigma lens would fit in here. That is a perfect fit. So would the Sigma 50mm 1.4. Other lenses I'm not sure about, unfortunately. It's very hard to tell. There is no way to adjust the size of this. I've tried things like pushing this down and trying to tie it back, but it really just does not work. So now, let's go back to the review. So I've owned this housing for about a year now, and the first time I took it out was actually to take some photos of someone surfing. He's a really nice guy, and I actually had a really decent experience. I tested the waterproof housing in the sink beforehand to make sure there was no leaks. The camera fit in quite nicely, and overall it was a really good experience, except for when I got onto the beach, I realised that the housing had started to fog up. Now luckily, once you actually put the housing in the water, it cools the ambient temperature inside the housing and clears the fog completely. It was then absolutely perfectly fine. I was worried at first, but after that it was just perfect. Now there's actually a strap on this housing, this one here, that's clipped in at the top. Now, I was using this, wrapping it around my arm like this to secure it to me. one of the waves actually ripped the whole housing completely out of my hand, and I was a really good grip on this. I really tied it around my hand, but it ripped it out completely, sending it about 20 feet down the beach. Now luckily, because this housing isn't vacuum sealed, it actually floats. So someone was able to pick it up just floating along on this water's surface. Now this was only about 20 minutes into the session, so I could have easily just, cut my losses and gone, but I stuck around for another hour or so, went back out into the water and took some really fantastic photos. This housing really did impress me. Now that does lead me on to one of the more annoying things about this housing, and that is because it's a non-specific housing, it's for many DSLRs and mirrorless cameras. There's a plastic screen at the back. That's all you have to work with through your camera while trying to operate it in the water. So if you're like me and you back button focus, very, very hard to do so. It's a lot better to try and put that actually on the shutter release instead, even though it's not optimal, but that's a lot easier to do instead of trying to back button focus and pressing through this kind of thick plastic. So before I talk about my most recent experience with this housing, I want to take a moment and talk about the pricing of it and how it fits in the market. So right now you can buy these from anywhere between £50 to £100 brand new. So different retailers will price it differently. Second hand, however, you can get them on a much greater reduction. I bought mine for I think about £40, but you can find them as low as £25, making them very accessible for people trying to get into water photography for the first time. Or if you just want to shoot photography in the rain and you're just quite apprehensive about, getting water on your gear. So it's really good for that. Now, comparing it to a industry built housing that you'd be camera specific, for example with my 5D4, if I was trying to find a housing specific for that camera, the cheapest on the market is £600–700, and the most expensive is over £3,000. They are really expensive, and there's basically no second-hand market for them, so you'd only really be able to get them brand new. So most recently I had this camera and this lens in the housing, a 50mm 1.8 STM and the 5D2, and I was just there trying to take some photos of my friends surfing, and it did a really good job. I got some really good photos. However, about 30 minutes into the session, I noticed that there was more fog developing inside the camera housing, which I was like, okay, that's a bit strange, because normally it's cleared by now and it's, shouldn't be a problem. So I tried to hold it underwater a bit longer, try and cool it down and clear the fog, but it wasn't working. I then took a closer look, and what I do and what I'd recommend you guys do as well if you have one of these housings is put something like this, like a tissue, inside the housing, so that if it gets water inside, you can see by the tissue changing colour slightly or just becoming saturated. So I could see that there was water actually inside the housing. Now obviously I straight away panicked, got out the water as fast as possible, and then I opened it up. And what was surprising is that the housing didn't actually leak from the seal at the top. There was no water inside there at all, but there was a decent amount of water splashed over the lens and the body of the camera. Luckily the 5D2 is still weather sealed, even though it is very old now. It is still technically weather sealed, the lens isn't, so I did check that the mount and everything hadn't got water in it, so I took the lens off, even though I do not like doing this on the beach. Took the lens off, made sure there was no water there, and it was all clean. So I gave it a wipe down, and yeah, I had a closer look onto the lens of the 5D2 and nothing had gotten into the lens as far as I could see. I did do it my best clean on the beach, and with the DiCAPac, as far as I could find, what had happened is a massive wave had hit the front port of the DiCAPac, forcing this ring really hard back at the housing, making the seal on the inside go completely inwards, allowing water to just pass through the threads. That's what I think happened, at least. And a decent amount of water got in before I was able to pick up on it and get it out of the water, so it is obviously susceptible to leakages and issues like that. So would I ever recommend you use a main camera in this DiCAPac? No, I would not. If you really value your camera, or it's something that you can't lose, do not use it in something like this. Spend the money or don't go in the water. So with that, I wouldn't use it. With this, again, would I put this back in there knowing it's leaked before? I probably would, but I wouldn't do it in wavy conditions. I would do it just on still water, because I don't think it's worth it with big waves. I really don't. So that's the experience I've had most recently with the DiCAPac. Now, the actual camera itself has been performing for about a month or so afterwards, absolutely fine. It just seems to have absolutely no lasting damage. It is a tank of a camera, really great camera, and yeah, that seems to be absolutely fine, which is a relief. But overall, really not the best experience with the DiCAPac. It is cheap, and I do expect to have issues with cheap products. You do get what you're paying for, but when it's risking that much money, especially with the main camera, I would not recommend putting it in there. It is a good way though if you want to try and go out in the rain or do something like that. It is a great way for that. But overall, I would say that this camera housing is only really suited for people that are just doing it for, you know, still conditions, and it's more as a precautionary measure than an actual waterproof housing. So if you were in a flat mill pond trying to get some photos of someone, absolutely fine. There's very little water that's going to be on the camera. When you're doing surf photography and you're getting absolutely barraged by massive waves, yeah, it's not good for that, because it will take massive damage, and as you've seen from mine, it did actually leak, which is the worst case scenario. So overall, I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. I hope this has helped you decide whether or not to buy this DiCAPac. And yeah, do keep in mind what I've said if you are going to buy it anyway. Thank you ever so much for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please leave a like and a comment saying so down below. And if you want to see more like this in the future, watch more of my videos. I make quite a few of these sort of photography based videos and giving you advice and reviews on photography products. But until next video, goodbye.